A new black student just arrived. No one knew his name. No one paid attention. They simply thought, just another one to bully. But Elijah Monroe was no ordinary student. He didn't fight back. He didn't lash out. He stayed silent, watched, waited for the right moment. Trent Holloway, the reigning king of Ridgeview Academy, thought he was playing a game of predator and prey. But what he didn't realize, he was the one being watched. No punches, no threats, just a single look, and Trent's entire world began to crumble. Because sometimes, true power doesn't need to be shouted, it only needs to be felt. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to update our latest videos. Monday morning. The gates of Ridgeview Academy opened like any other day, welcoming hundreds of students into its polished campus, with manicured trees and glass walls reflecting the early sun. This was a place built for the elite, the children of CEOs and senators, raised in gated mansions with private drivers and lunch orders from five-star hotel kitchens. No one paid attention to the new student walking through the gate in a simple grey hoodie, backpack slung over one shoulder, hands in his pockets, his eyes calm, almost as if he was used to being ignored. Elijah Monroe. No one knew that name yet, but soon it would be the name whispered in hallways, like a secret that demanded reverence. He walked with no rush. Didn't scan the campus nervously like most new students. No signs of hesitation or being lost. But if anyone looked closely, they'd notice something strange. No one walked within a meter of him. Not because they were avoiding him, but because there was something about Elijah that made people instinctively keep their distance. His silence wasn't shy. It was intentional. Every step calculated. Every glance deliberate, like a chess move made far in advance. A few students glanced at him out of the corner of their eyes and muttered, "Who's that guy? No idea. Doesn't really look like Ridgeview material, huh?" What they didn't know was that Elijah Monroe was the son of Donovan Monroe, a name whispered even in circles of power. Not a name on magazine covers, not a man who gave speeches. But if Donovan Monroe walked into a room, the powerful would instinctively lower their voices and step back, not out of fear of crime, but out of respect for the man who was the law behind closed doors. Elijah wasn't here to ride on his father's name. He didn't flaunt wealth, didn't chase attention. Instead, he moved like a shadow through light, soundless, trace-free. But when Elijah's eyes swept over someone, they'd feel a chill in their spine, and never know why. From the very first moment he crossed the gates of Ridgeview Academy, Elijah didn't need introductions. He wasn't here to make friends, wasn't here to fit in. He was here to observe. And already he saw the truth. The overconfident boys at the top, the entitled children of privilege, and one name in particular, Trent Holloway, the self-proclaimed king of this polished playground. Elijah's lips curled slightly, not quite a smile, more like a signal. He had seen something interesting. The game was about to begin. But not everyone realized this was the first day of a silent shift in power. At Ridgeview Academy, if there was one student considered the uncrowned king, it was Trent Holloway. Tall, with perfectly slicked back brown hair and a varsity football jacket casually draped over his shoulders like he was born to wear it, Trent never had to try to be noticed. As the quarterback of the football team and the son of Charles Holloway, the real estate mogul who essentially owned the school's donor board, Trent could walk into any room, and people would part like the sea. Not out of respect, but because silence was safer. Trent wasn't smart, he didn't need to be. In Trent's world, power came from the Holloway name, not from books. Teachers gave him a pass, coaches deferred to him, students stayed quiet. Every time Trent entered the cafeteria, the best table was magically open. Every time he made a snide remark, the rehearsed laughter of his entourage echoed like background music. And the weaker students, the scholarship kids, the newcomers, the ones who didn't look Ridgeview, all knew the unspoken rule. Don't get in Trent Holloway's way. That kind of power made Trent believe he was untouchable. He once shoved a student to the ground just for looking at him funny. Once reduced a freshman to tears with just a few jokes. No one reported him, because at Ridgeview, reporting meant exile, a one-way ticket out of the privilege carousel. So when Trent heard about the new kid, a black student, modestly dressed, clearly not from old money, he scoffed, "Let me guess, diversity scholarship, right?" And the moment he saw Elijah Monroe for the first time, walking across the courtyard without lowering his gaze, without flinching, without any sign of fear, Trent clocked him immediately. A kid who doesn't know his place, he told his best friend, is about to get taught a lesson. To Trent, power didn't need proving. It was maintained through subtle shoves in the hallway, jokes that cut just enough, and the comfort of laughter echoing around him. He didn't need to hit anyone. He just needed people to fear him. So when Elijah didn't flinch, didn't bow, didn't even glance his way, Trent didn't see strength, he saw disrespect. "Who does he think he is?" Trent muttered, jaw clenched as Elijah walked by, eyes forward, not even acknowledging his presence. What Trent didn't know was that for the first time in his life, he was facing someone who didn't play by his rules. Someone who didn't need to enroll in his little high school game of dominance. Because Elijah came from a different board entirely, a different level, and from that very moment, the game had already begun. The second-floor hallway of Ridgeview Academy was always bustling in the early morning. Sneakers tapped rhythmically against the polished tile. Laughter wove through the clatter of locker doors slamming shut. But that morning, a different sound cut through. Quiet, intentional. Thud. Trent Holloway's shoulder accidentally slammed hard into Elijah Monroe as they passed each other. The books in Elijah's arms dropped to the floor with a loud echoing smack. Around them, faint chuckles rose, not loud, but just enough for the target to hear. Trent turned around, smirking. "Oops, didn't see you standing there." The apology was soft, but his eyes, sharp, deliberate, like a blade laced in velvet. It was a crafted incident, subtle enough to avoid punishment, cutting enough to humiliate. Elijah bent down to pick up his books, not hurriedly, not clumsily, just slow, calm, precise, as if nothing had happened. He didn't look up, didn't speak, not a single word, and that silence, it got under Trent's skin. He was used to two types of reactions. One, fear, the kind that made freshmen drop their gaze and shrink like prey. Two, anger, the kind that tried to fight back, only to be crushed and turned into a joke. But Elijah, he wasn't either. The next day, accidental bump number 2 happened, this time in a secluded corner near the library. Trent's arm brushed roughly across Elijah's backpack. A folder slipped out and scattered papers across the floor. Cue the smirk, cue the silence. Elijah picked them up, unbothered, turned, walked away. "Is this kid deaf or something?" Trent snapped to his friends. He was used to laughter echoing after his moves, but this time no one laughed too loud. No one knew why, only that something about Elijah felt different. Day 3. Words were added. Hope you're not carrying a knife in that bag. You know, you people tend to snap easily." A dry laugh came from one of Trent's friends. "Probably a diversity scholarship. Gotta have those representative faces each year, right?" Elijah heard it all, but kept walking. No flinch, no glance back, not even a blink. Trent Holloway had never felt so infuriated by being ignored. "Who the hell does he think he is?" he growled, slamming his locker shut. "You think staying quiet makes you strong? Number, I'm gonna make you bow your head. In front of everyone." What Trent didn't realize, the moment he decided to play the power game with Elijah Monroe, was the moment he gave up control of the rules. The hallway leading to Ridgeview Academy's athletic wing was always packed after school, a gathering ground where students laughed, joked, and where Trent Holloway often used the moment to project his dominance. But today, he wasn't here to perform. Today, Trent wanted to publicly take Elijah Monroe down. Elijah was passing through the crowd when Trent blocked his path. As if by reflex, the students around them parted, a conditioned response from those who'd grown used to scenes of targeting, mocking, humiliation. Trent leaned forward, one hand pressed against a locker, voice raised just enough to draw attention. "Hey Monroe, I heard you transferred in from a public school." "That's interesting. See, this place isn't really meant for people like you." The words exploded through the hallway like a firecracker, masked behind a fake smile. A few students laughed, but the laughter faded almost immediately as Elijah lifted his head and looked directly into Trent's eyes. No words, no anger, no flinch. Just one look, cold as steel, disturbingly calm. Trent paused. He meant to keep going, but his lips went dry. There was something in that silence, something that stripped the performance away. Elijah's silence wasn't weakness, it was a direct rejection, right to Trent's face. "You're not worth a response." That stare didn't accuse, it didn't hate, it was like a mirror, held up to the hollow shell of Trent Holloway, forcing him to confront how empty he truly was. For a few seconds, Trent didn't know if he was winning or losing. A 10th grade student nearby mumbled under his breath, "Wow, that look, that's exactly how my dad looks when he's really mad." Elijah walked on, no shoving, no rush, just smooth, purposeful strides, as if he had never been blocked. And Trent, still standing there, his friends shifting uneasily. Some turned away, others shot glances, nervous, uncertain. For the first time ever, Trent Holloway had been dismissed, and it stung worse than a punch. He slammed his fist into the locker behind him. "He thinks he's better than me? Fine, if a stare isn't enough to make him bow, I'll use everything else." What Trent didn't know was that the game he thought he was leading had already been taken over by his opponent. That afternoon, Ridgeview Academy's cafeteria was packed as usual. The clatter of metal trays, footsteps echoing across the tiled floor, and bursts of laughter from clusters of wealthy students created the familiar rhythm of lunchtime. But today, that rhythm was about to be silenced. Elijah Monroe sat alone in the far corner of the cafeteria, as he always did. In front of him, a simple lunch tray, a cold sandwich, a can of soda, and a calm gaze that seemed to register no one around him. From across the room, Trent Holloway entered, flanked by his usual entourage, orbiting him like satellites around a star. "Look at him," Trent muttered, voice laced with challenge, still sitting alone like he owns the place. He no longer wanted to play subtle games, he wanted to break Elijah. Publicly, in front of everyone. He strode toward Elijah's table. Each step seemed to amplify the tension rising in the room. More eyes turned, a few snickers slipped out, but so did frowns. Trent stopped directly in front of Elijah's table. "Hey, Monroe, thought I'd help you feel a little more seen." Slam. The lunch tray flipped. Soda spilled across the table, the sticky liquid splashing onto Elijah's shirt. The sandwich hit the floor, shattering like the ego of any student humiliated so publicly. Silence. The entire cafeteria went still, like the air had been sucked out of the room. No laughter, no whispers, no one even lifted a fork. Every eye locked on Elijah. And he didn't say a word. Elijah slowly set down his fork. His hand didn't tremble. He looked at the spreading soda stain on his shirt, then raised his eyes to meet Trent's. A stare without anger, without fear, without contempt, only utter emptiness. A look that seemed to say, "This? This is the best you've got?" Trent froze. His smug grin vanished. For a split second he realized he had just made a mistake, one that couldn't be undone. Elijah stood up, his shirt soaked, but his posture composed. He didn't bow his head. He didn't lash out. He didn't need anyone to step in. He just walked away. The entire cafeteria remained motionless. A junior whispered, "Trent Holloway just messed with the wrong guy." For the first time at Ridgeview Academy, the one silenced wasn't the victim. It was the bully. The dining room in Donovan Monroe's house was never loud. Soft golden light from the chandelier spilled onto a polished walnut table, flawless and pristine. The silverware was aligned in perfect European fashion. Every detail was precise, disciplined, cold, just like the man who owned the house. Elijah sat across from his father, in front of him a plate of untouched steak. But tonight's dinner wasn't about food. It was about rules, about discipline, about power passed in silence. Donovan Monroe, black hair streaked with silver slate-gray tailored suit, posture as straight as a blade, ate as he always did. No questions about school, no inquiries about tests. To him, those things were too small. There was only one thing he cared about: order, and whether his son could hold it. Elijah didn't intend to bring it up, but his father already knew. After a long pause, Donovan set down his knife. No noise. He didn't look at his son. Just said, in a voice like steel, "There's been something at school." Not a question, a statement. Elijah nodded. "Some people think they can bully me." No emotion, no blame, no plea for protection. Donovan stayed silent. He cut another piece of steak and chewed slowly. Then, as if he had just finished weighing a serious matter, he finally looked up, sharp black eyes meeting Elijah's. "Name?" Elijah didn't flinch from that gaze, but he also didn't answer. "I'll handle it. My way." Donovan stared at him for several long seconds. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. But the atmosphere in the room shifted. A moment later, he lifted his wine glass and gently tapped it against the rim of the crystal goblet. "Good. But make sure they never forget it." No threat, no command, just a reminder, like a compass guiding life in the Monroe world. If anyone touches the Monroe family, that will be the last time they act without consequences. Elijah didn't move, but something in his eyes had shifted. That was no longer the gaze of a new student. It was the look of someone who had chosen when to strike back. The next morning, the halls of Ridgeview Academy bustled as usual. The bell rang, sneakers echoed against polished floors, and laughter bounced between the lockers. But amidst the noise, something had changed. The name Elijah Monroe had started to surface. Not loudly, Not clearly, but just enough to slip into whispered conversations near lockers, in restrooms, and in the back rows of classrooms. "Hey, the new guy, heard his last name's Monroe." "Monroe? No way. Is he related to Donovan Monroe?" A group of senior students huddled, whispering while stealing glances at Elijah, who stood silently by his locker, calmly arranging his books. One of them tried to act disinterested, but their fingers tightened subtly around their backpack strap. A few others suddenly chose to take the long way around just to avoid passing him. At Ridgeview, some names didn't need explaining, and Donovan Monroe was one of them. That name had appeared in stories adults never finished, in phone calls answered in hushed tones, in meetings where even senators didn't dare to laugh too loud. Donovan Monroe wasn't a legend, he was a reality, and that reality had just walked into Ridgeview, in the form of a quiet student no one dared to underestimate anymore. Trent Holloway began to notice. At first, he had taken Elijah's silence as defiance, a challenge that had to be crushed. But now, even the kids who used to laugh when he mocked Elijah were beginning to keep their distance. No one said anything to his face. It was just, during lunch, no one laughed as loudly when he entered the cafeteria. The usual pats on the back from his crew, gone. And worst of all, he overheard someone murmur, "You think Trent even knows who that kid really is?" That was the first chill that crept up his spine. Elijah, still the same. No talking, no smiling, no change in expression. But that unbothered, unreadable calm had now become the most terrifying thing of all. Because at Ridgeview there were plenty of smart kids, poor kids, weird kids, rebellious kids. But a student whose name was whispered, like someone who operated outside the rules. There was only one, Elijah Monroe, and Ridgeview had begun to feel it. A storm was forming, but this one wasn't screaming. It simply stood still, waiting for the exact moment to swallow everything whole. Trent Holloway had never felt watched like this before. He used to control the gaze. Wherever he went, eyes followed. A single glance could make someone drop their head. A sarcastic smirk was enough to keep someone up at night. He was the hunter, the one who struck first, the one who could throw others off balance with a single offhand comment. But now, it was different. In the halls of Ridgeview, where Trent once commanded every joke, every laugh, every ounce of fear, now his footsteps felt heavier than ever. He could feel eyes on him, but whenever he turned, all he saw was Elijah standing at the end of the corridor, eyes calmly fixed on a book like the world didn't exist. The problem was, Elijah didn't do anything. He didn't speak. He didn't touch. He didn't confront. But that silence, it cut like a knife. Trent walked through the cafeteria and saw his former friends avoid his eyes. He sat at a table, no one joined him. He went to class and caught people looking at him like they were waiting to see when he'd crack. He tried to push back. One day during the break, he laughed loudly, trying to lighten the mood. "What's up with you guys? You look like you've seen a ghost." No one laughed. One of them responded quietly, "You seriously don't get it, Trent? You messed with the wrong person." Trent clenched his jaw. To him, Elijah Monroe was still just some quiet, friendless black nerd, just like the first day he saw him. But somehow, the entire order of things had flipped. Every step Elijah took now pulled gravity. One silence from him could freeze the air in a room. And worst of all, Trent no longer felt in control of the game. One day, walking out of the restroom, Trent saw a stranger standing at the end of the hallway. Well-dressed, sharp eyes like steel, just standing there, not doing anything. But as Trent passed, the man gave a faint smile. Careful now, Holloway's golden boy. Trent's heart skipped. He turned to ask, "Who are you?" But the man had already walked away, gone without a trace. When he told his friends later, one of them whispered, "You don't think Elijah sent someone, do you?" Trent forced a chuckle, but his laugh trembled, because he knew Elijah hadn't lifted a finger. But what was happening had already gone far beyond schoolyard power plays. A silent boy was turning the whole school into a chessboard. And Trent, he wasn't the player anymore. He was a pawn. Friday afternoon, the parking lot behind Ridgeview Academy was quieter than usual. Trent Holloway walked slowly, head lowered, backpack swinging on one shoulder. He was no longer flanked by his usual group. Everyone had scattered the moment the dismissal bell rang, perhaps coincidentally, perhaps intentionally. As he turned into the lot, his footsteps froze. Two men stood beside his black Mustang. Well-dressed, charcoal suits, dark ties, sunglasses still on, even though the sun had dipped low. They didn't look like teachers, not parents either. They stood still like statues, no introductions, no names needed. Trent knew immediately they were here for him. One of them nodded slightly, his voice low and precise, as if every word had been weighed before being spoken. "Mr. Donovan Monroe would like to see you." Trent's heart dropped into his stomach. No choices, only obligation. He swallowed hard and followed. No one touched him, no one forced him, but each step felt like it was made of lead. The back parking lot, once a place for dates, joyrides, or after-school boasts, had now become a silent courtroom. And at the far end, beside a sleek black SUV, Elijah Monroe was waiting, leaning casually against the door, hands in the pockets of his dark grey coat. No smile, no angry glare, just that terrifying calm of someone in control. Trent stopped in front of Elijah. No words came. He didn't dare meet his eyes. All the confidence of the once king of Ridgeview hallways was gone. Elijah lifted his head. His gaze, sharp as a blade, sliced through the silence. He stepped forward, one step at a time, not fast, not slow, just enough to make the distance suffocating. Trent didn't move back, but his entire body locked up like it had turned to ice. Elijah tilted his head slightly and spoke, not with a threat, but with the calm declaration of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. "I don't need to touch you, but if I wanted to, your life would never be the same again." Just one sentence, no fists, no shouting, no witnesses. Yet those words cut deeper than any punch. Trent stood frozen, lips pressed tight, blood cold in his veins. Elijah didn't need to intimidate, he only had to speak, and the truth would seep into every corner of his opponent's soul. Elijah turned and walked to the SUV. The door opened, closed, the engine purred. And Trent? He remained standing there, alone in the parking lot. Like someone who had just stepped back from the edge of a cliff, but knew deep down he hadn't truly survived. That night, Trent Holloway couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, the soft yellow glow of the nightlight casting shadows on the ceiling, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. No more laughter, no more arrogance in his gaze, only a quiet fear slowly tightening around his mind like a noose. The image of Elijah standing by the SUV replayed in his head. No threats, no aggressive moves. He didn't even touch Trent. Yet somehow Trent's entire world felt like it had been crushed in Elijah's hands. The next morning, as Trent tried to act normal walking into school, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. No name. Tell your father to be careful. Accidents can happen. Just 9 words. No exclamation mark. No explicit threat. But Trent knew this wasn't a joke. His father, Mr. Victor Holloway, was a prominent figure in real estate and finance, known for shaking hands with the city's highest powers. But Donovan Monroe? That was a name even Victor Holloway never mentioned, without lowering his voice. Trent sank onto the stone bench behind the library. His hands were trembling so badly he couldn't even unzip his backpack. He tried to convince himself, maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it's not that Elijah Monroe, maybe. But deep down he knew. The look Elijah gave him last night wasn't the look of a student. It was the look of someone who held the entire board, and every piece on it. Trent jumped up, ready to find Elijah. To do what? He wasn't sure. Apologize, negotiate, beg. But as he stepped out of the library courtyard, he saw Elijah walking calmly down the hallway. White dress shirt, hands in pockets, that same gaze, that same slow, deliberate pace, like the world around him was just a background blur. Elijah didn't glance at Trent, but Trent froze. He didn't need Elijah to speak, didn't need a warning, didn't need a phone call. Elijah didn't need to threaten, because fear had already done it for him. And the scariest part, Trent had no idea what would happen next. No script, no plan, no second chance, only one silent, haunting question echoing in his mind. If he can make me tremble with silence alone, what else is he capable of? That evening, inside the vast home office of the Holloway estate, Victor Holloway was in a virtual meeting with his board of shareholders. Growth charts, expansion plans, bank interest rates, everything looked under control. Until the door creaked open. Trent stepped in. No knock, no pause. His face was pale, eyes wide. Victor furrowed his brow, politely excused himself from the call, then turned to his son. "What is it?" Trent swallowed hard and handed over his phone. On the screen was the message, still unread. "Tell your father to be careful. Accidents can happen." Victor squinted, slowly rereading the words. Silence. His lips tightened, as if trying to swallow a block of ice. A shiver passed through him. "Who sent this?" he asked, his voice raspy. "I don't know, but it was him. Elijah Monroe." The moment the name was spoken, the air in the room thickened. Victor looked up sharply, locking eyes with his son, but this time there was no anger in his stare, only fear. "You said, Monroe who?" "Elijah. He goes to my school, but Dad, he's Donovan Monroe's son." Victor shot to his feet. The whiskey glass on the table nearly toppled. Without another word, he stormed to a drawer, pulled out an old cell phone, the kind reserved for contacts no one was ever supposed to know he had. He dialed. The call rang, then cut off. No signal. He tried again. Same result. The room fell completely silent, save for the sound of their heavy breathing. After a moment, Victor collapsed into his chair and spoke slowly. "You don't understand, Trent. There are people you can negotiate with. But Donovan Monroe isn't one of them. He doesn't get angry. He doesn't speak. He just presses a button, and things disappear." Trent said nothing. He knew that now, too late, but he knew. "You ever worked with him?" Trent asked quietly. Victor stared at his drink, his eyes distant. "No one works with Donovan. People just make sure they never cross him." And now, that message, just 9 quiet words, wasn't a warning, wasn't a prank. It was reality waiting to be enforced. That night, the Holloway household didn't sleep. No one believed everything was under control anymore. No one thought power could shield them from a name whispered in the dark. The next day, Trent Holloway arrived at school earlier than usual, not out of motivation, but because he hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale. The uniform, normally ironed to perfection each morning by the housekeeper, was now wrinkled and disheveled. Trent's footsteps, once confident and echoing through the halls of Ridgeview, were now cautious, like someone sneaking through enemy territory inside the very school he once ruled. Elijah Monroe was still there, sitting by the classroom window, soft sunlight casting over his shoulder. No bodyguards, no entourage, no trace of the shadow empire Trent had imagined. But it was that very calm that sent cold shivers down Trent's spine. Every time their eyes met, even by accident, Elijah didn't scowl, didn't sneer, didn't glare. He simply looked back, steady, composed, like someone who already knew he had won. And to Trent, that was more terrifying than any punch to the face. During lunch, Trent no longer sat at the center of the cafeteria. He chose a hidden corner near the emergency exit, away from prying eyes. His tray sat untouched. His once loyal inner circle, the same guys who used to laugh whenever he humiliated someone, now sat several tables away. No one wanted to be near him. No one said anything, but everyone understood. Trent Holloway messed with the wrong person. When Elijah walked in, no one spoke. Whispers died mid-sentence. A few eyes followed his steps, but quickly turned away when he glanced back. Elijah simply took a seat, pulled out a book, and started reading, as if the entire world crumbling around him had absolutely nothing to do with him. And for Trent, that indifference was the heaviest judgment. That night, Trent sat on his bed, phone in hand. He had opened that same text thread at least a dozen times that day. No new messages, no follow-up calls, but that silence. That was what truly drove him mad, because now every move Elijah made, even doing nothing, felt like a blow, an invisible punch tightening around Trent's chest. There was no more anger, no more defiance, only fear, silent, creeping, devouring him second by second. He had once believed that if he were ever taken down, it would be in a grand battle, some dramatic showdown. But no, it all started with a glance, a whisper, and a text message that no one shouted, yet held the power to bury an entire legacy. Trent Holloway, once the arrogant face of Ridgeview Academy, could no longer speak confidently in class, couldn't lift his head walking through the halls, couldn't breathe too loudly whenever Elijah leaned against a doorframe. He had once been furious. Now all he could do was try to survive. That night, Trent Holloway jolted awake from a chaotic dream, his back drenched in sweat, his heart pounding like a war drum. He had dreamt of running through an endless corridor at Ridgeview Academy, where every door slammed shut the moment he reached for it. Behind him, slow footsteps echoed, never hurrying, never rushing, but always close, as if whatever was coming didn't need to hurry because it knew Trent would never escape. Then, in the dream, a voice emerged, low, steady, not angry, but whispering right into his ear, "You think I'm weak?" Just that. And Trent bolted upright, his heart threatening to burst out of his chest. The next day, Trent didn't go to school. He told his mother he was sick. But the truth was, he couldn't bring himself to step foot into Ridgeview. Not because he feared being punched, not because he feared being mocked, but because every hallway, every corner, every chair in the cafeteria carried the silent shadow of Elijah Monroe, quiet, wordless, but always present, like a constant reminder that Trent had gone too far. The nightmare didn't stay in his sleep. It had bled into waking life, seeping into every conscious moment. Trent began to lose sleep. He lay for hours on his bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. His mind spiraling with unanswered questions. What if he actually does something? Is my dad safe? Why is he still silent? Is he planning something? On the third night, Trent heard a faint sound outside his window. It was just the wind. But he yanked the curtain shut. His heart raced, his palms were ice cold, and then the dream returned. This time Elijah didn't speak. He just stood at the end of the hallway, expressionless, eyes blank, as if Trent was nothing but a speck of dust who had bothered the wrong person. From a boy who used to inflict fear, Trent had become someone who lived inside it. He once thought of fighting back, even drafted an apology, even considered begging his father for help. But every time, he tore those thoughts to shreds. Nothing could help, because what was crushing Trent wasn't Elijah himself. It was the invisible fear Trent had created. Elijah didn't do anything, but it was that not doing anything that was driving Trent insane. At Ridgeview Academy, no one said it aloud, but everyone saw it clearly. Trent Holloway was unraveling, step by step, night by night, all triggered by a dream that he would never fully wake up from. It was a gloomy Friday afternoon, the sky dim as if soaked in unease. Trent Holloway left class later than usual, his coat zipped up high, eyes fixed on the ground. No one called his name, no more cheers from his former clique, only the echo of his solitary footsteps through the halls of Ridgeview Academy, which no longer served as a stage for his power. When he stepped out into the parking lot, Trent froze. Elijah Monroe was leaning against his black Mustang, not touching it, not damaging it, just standing there, hands in his coat pockets, eyes calm, waiting. Not tense, not angry, just chillingly composed. Trent's body stiffened on the spot. He looked around. No one was there. Only the soft wind and the sound of his own heartbeat growing louder with each beat. Elijah began walking toward him, step by step, unrushed. Yet the distance between them collapsed with suffocating speed. Trent swallowed hard, unable to move his feet. When Elijah stopped, he was less than an arm's length away. The wind stirred, brushing the hem of Elijah's dark coat. His gaze never left Trent, and then in a voice so soft it almost carried no weight. "Do you understand now?" No threats, no shouting, no need for another word, just one question, and everything inside Trent collapsed. He couldn't answer, not because he didn't know, but because there was nothing left to justify. Everything was already crystal clear. All the previous actions, all the arrogance, the mockery, the shoves, the flipped lunch trays, all of it now reduced to foolish memories of someone who once thought he was untouchable. Trent said nothing. He only nodded, a small nod, like a silent plea for mercy. A nod, like an unspoken confession, a nod to officially accept that he had lost. Elijah nodded once in return. No smile, no shoulder pat, no gesture of triumph. He simply turned away and walked off. No looking back. And there was no need to. Because that one question, "Do you understand now?" would echo in Trent's mind forever, like a sentence that needed no judge to pronounce. No one at Ridgeview Academy knew exactly what happened between Trent Holloway and Elijah Monroe. There were no punches thrown, No footage leaked online, no calls made to the principal's office, no one was suspended. But everyone could feel it. The order at Ridgeview had shifted. Trent still showed up to class, still wore his old varsity jacket, still sat in his usual seat. But he was no longer the Trent Holloway of before. His gaze no longer lifted high, his voice no longer echoed. His former entourage, the ones who used to laugh until they cried at every prank, now avoided eye contact with him, as if failure was contagious. No one called Trent the king of the hallways anymore, because now the one they all quietly avoided was Elijah. Elijah Monroe still went to school like usual, still silent, still eating lunch alone at the far corner of the cafeteria. No bragging, no displays, no retaliation. He didn't need to do anything, because his very presence was enough to keep everything in order. When Elijah walked into a classroom, conversations softened. When he walked down the hallway, eyes turned away, not because they feared he'd lash out, but because everyone understood. He didn't need to. Some said Elijah wasn't scary, and they were right. What was terrifying was the absolute control he wielded, without ever saying a word. No fists, no threats, just silence, enough to make an entire system shift its axis. As for Trent, he no longer dreamed of the stadium lights. Every night a single question repeated in his head. Do you understand now? He did. And what frightened him most was not what Elijah had done, but what Elijah had chosen not to do. Ridgeview Academy would remember that school year as one with no scandals, no fights, no expulsions. Only one student. One person who never needed overt power, never raised his voice, never chased titles. Elijah Monroe, the one who redefined strength in silence. No one dared to challenge him, not out of fear of retaliation, but because everyone knew true power doesn't have to speak. Some people use fists to prove themselves. Some use shouts to force others to listen. But Elijah Monroe didn't need to do either. He didn't need to reclaim justice, because justice had never left his side. He only needed others to realize who was truly in control of the game. No revenge, no threats, just a single look. And the one who once stood on top bowed in fear of himself. True strength doesn't need to be loud. It lies in this simple truth. When you do nothing at all, yet the whole world falls silent. Drop a comment if you've ever met a Trent Holloway in your life. And if you've ever felt like an Elijah Monroe, quiet but never weak, then this is your story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.